Okay, so I've been doing this social media thing for a while now, right? And as I've engaged with posts and comments or whatever, one of the things I'm often coming across is this idea that the biblical narrative of Jesus Christ is just a retelling of the ancient Egyptian god Horus. And y'all have probably seen them too, the memes or the posts or the deep takes in the comment sections. Honestly, it got to the point that I'd heard it so often that I thought to myself for a second, like, man, maybe there's something to this. Maybe the stories of Horus and Jesus are so alike, and that's why people really keep saying that the one story comes from the other. So of course that meant that I had to do my own metaphorical digging into the matter. And baby, let me tell you something. I combed through books and articles. I combed through ancient Egyptian texts and artifacts relating to Horus. I even dusted off my old biblical Greek skills just to make sure I was understanding what the biblical text was saying about Jesus. Because ultimately, I wanted to make sure that I understood this whole matter from the ancient sources themselves. And because the conception and birth and death and resurrection are so essential to the life of Jesus Christ, I ended up primarily researching the conception and birth and death and resurrection of Horus. And then after doing all this research, I took what I learned about Horus, and then I took what I learned about Jesus, and then I compared them, and y'all, I was just shocked. Shocked to find that it wasn't even close at all.
Like, it really wasn't though.
And honestly, I was disappointed with how unalike these narratives were, because the way people was going in, I was expecting them to be exactly or almost identical. And the truth of the matter is, they're not close at all. So I said, let me go ahead and make a video about all this, because I'm so sick and tired of people just regurgitating this false narrative with no research, no data. They're just out here spewing this as if it's fact. And I was like, let me go ahead and put the facts out there so that we can have a better conversation about this. So boom, made a video. Well, actually 2 videos. The first video, this video, I'll just talk about Horus's and Jesus's conceptions and births, right? And then in the second video, I'll talk about Horus's and Jesus's deaths and resurrections. But before I get into any of it, let me remind y'all that I'm Erika, and this is Just So You Know, and here we're all about talking about biblical archaeology. So make sure you're subscribed and follow me across all of my social media platforms just to make sure you're getting in on all this good content I'm trying to give you. All right, so let's get into it. Horus, Jesus, let's go. So to really get into all of this, I've got to first talk about who Horus was. So first off, for those of you who don't know, Horus was a very important ancient Egyptian deity, like a really important ancient Egyptian deity or god. He was worshipped as a sky god. He was worshipped as a protector warrior. And probably most importantly, he was worshipped as the god of ancient Egyptian kingship. Like seriously, pharaohs were even considered to be the earthly incarnate manifestation of Horus. So yeah, Horus was a very important ancient Egyptian deity. A lot of times in ancient Egyptian imagery, he's depicted as this falcon-headed man. Sometimes we get the Horus eye imagery. Sometimes he's depicted as a baby or a small child. Sometimes we even get him depicted as a baby or a small child sitting on the lap of his mother, Isis. And here's the thing. The narratives and movements and stories of Horus are not contained in one canonical source, not in one space like we have with Jesus in the Bible. And I really wish it was, because it would have made things a lot easier when I was trying to do my research. But no, ancient Egyptian religion is like, hey, let's record various parts about various ancient Egyptian deities on various artifacts in various locations and spaces across various Egyptian historical time periods. Yeah. Like that. Yeah. Yeah. And so basically what you have to do, at least for Horus, is you have to piece together the accounts and his narratives. You have to piece it together basically like a puzzle. And where do you find most of these puzzle pieces? You find them in what we know as ancient Egyptian coffin texts and ancient Egyptian pyramid texts. Now, coffin texts are these collection of ancient Egyptian funeral magical formulas or spells. And they're written in hieroglyphs on the inside and outside of these coffins that are dated to around the Middle Kingdom period. And when I say the Middle Kingdom period, I'm talking about the time of 2055 to 1650 BCE. Pyramid texts are a collection of ancient Egyptian magical spells too, but the pyramid texts are located inside of pyramids along the walls. And so when it really came time to get into learning about Horus's conception, one of the first ancient texts that I came across was coffin text spell 148. Now, coffin text spell 148 appears about 8 times on coffins that are all dated between 2130 to 1630 BCE. And let me just put this disclaimer out there. Within these 8, there are a few of them that are not very well preserved, but scholars have still been able to identify some of these hieroglyphs as part of coffin text spell 148. Now, according to coffin text spell 148, lines 209 and 210, Horus's mama, Isis, another very important ancient Egyptian deity, by the way. Horus's mama, Isis, she finds out that she's pregnant after this flash of lightning. And then she proclaims that she's pregnant from the seed of another very, 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 very important ancient Egyptian deity, Osiris. Oh, and fun fact, Osiris, Horus's daddy, and Isis, Horus's mama, they are this brother and sister who are married to each other.
Ugh, that's nasty.
Yeah, that's right. They are booed up siblings. That's right. Yeah. And baby, let me tell y'all something. There are a number of ancient texts that talk about how these ancient Egyptian booed up siblings were getting it on all the time too.
Girl,
but listen, that's not what we're gonna talk about here. I gotta keep it moving. I'm just saying. So anyway, that's the point of coffin text spell 148. Isis finds out that she's pregnant. She proclaims that she's pregnant by her brother husband Osiris. And then later on, we find out that she's pregnant with Horus. But in terms of conception, from this text, we don't get a lot of details on how the conception took place. Oh, but don't worry. We do get more detail in pyramid text 366 and pyramid text 518. And it's real interesting to note that the pyramid texts talking about the conception of Horus are older than the coffin text spell we just talked about. Pyramid text 366, which is connected to Pharaoh Teti of the 6th dynasty, dates to around 2323 to 2291 BCE. And then pyramid text 518, which is connected to Pharaoh Pepi I of the 6th dynasty, it dates to around 2289 to 2255 BCE. Now, from pyramid text 518, we get the very important detail that Osiris is the one that impregnates Isis. But that's all we get from that one. But pyramid text 366 gives us some real spicy details on how Osiris impregnates Isis. So it talks about how Isis sexually arouses Osiris. And I'm gonna try and keep it PG, y'all. I'm gonna really try and keep it safe and censored. I'm gonna try and be careful here. Basically, it says that Osiris's male sexual organ interacts with Isis's female sexual organs, if you know what I'm saying, right? It talks about that. And listen, y'all, this same spicy scenario of Isis getting, impregnated is even more vividly detailed on the Amenmos stela of the 18th dynasty in the Great Hymn of Osiris. This beautifully carved 3-foot-tall limestone stela, which belonged to Amenmos, who was this high-ranking Egyptian official, is a dedication stela which contains the Great Hymn to Osiris. The hymn is a very important ancient Egyptian religious text that talks about the death and resurrection of the ancient Egyptian god Osiris. So in the Great Hymn of Osiris, after searching for and finding the dead body of Osiris, Isis hovers over Osiris and brings his male sexual organ back to life, and then she proceeds to extract the seeds from his male sexual organ, thereby procreating with Osiris to make Horus. Y'all got that, right? Isis becomes pregnant with Horus when she does the do with a dead Osiris whose male sexual organ she had to bring back to life. And guess what, y'all? We see the same thing found in a later recording of the Isis and Osiris mythology that was recorded by the ancient Greek historian and biographer Plutarch. Now, according to Plutarch's account of the Isis and Osiris myth, Isis restores Osiris's member, that is his sexual male organ, and then becomes pregnant with Horus after restoring said member because she, Isis, engages in activities with his sexual male organ. And listen to me, y'all. At this point, I've only talked about the textual accounts of Isis's impregnation with Horus. I haven't even touched the visual depictions of Isis's impregnation with Horus. And the first depiction I want to talk about is the one that's found inside the ancient temple of Seti I at Abydos. Now, in this depiction, we see a reassembled Osiris, and he's laying flat on his back on this bier. And then we see Isis in the form of a bird, and she's hovering over Osiris's sexual part, all of which of this is to be a visual suggestion of them engaging in sexual intercourse. And it's from this act she becomes pregnant with Horus. We see this scene almost identically on 3 separate depictions inside the ancient temple of Hathor at Dendara. Again, we see Osiris's reassembled body, and we see Isis hovering over his body in the form of a bird or a kite. And again, this imagery is meant to convey that this is some type of sexual activity that will ultimately result in Isis becoming pregnant with Horus. So based upon Coffin Text Spell 148 and Pyramid Text 366 and 518, and the Great Hymn of Osiris from the Amun-Mo Stela of the 18th dynasty, and Plutarch's recording of the Isis and Osiris myth, and the depictions found at the ancient temple at Abydos, and the 3 from the ancient temple of Hathor at Dendara. Based upon all these texts, Horus was conceived when his mother Isis had sexual intercourse with her dead brother husband's body, but she had sex with his sexual organ that she brought to life. And this is how Horus was conceived. Now we need to take all that we've just talked about with Horus' conception and compare that to what we learned about Jesus Christ's conception, which is found in the gospel accounts of Matthew and Luke in the Bible. Now, when it comes to Jesus' conception, the first thing we learn from the Gospels is that his mama Mary was a human, first off, and she was a virgin. No, seriously, the biblical text really goes out of its way to make sure that its readers understand that Mary was a virgin. In Luke, when Mary is talking to the angel that announces that she's going to be pregnant, she's like, how can this be when I've never known a man? Which is an euphemism for not having had sex. And in Matthew, she's called a parthenos, which is the Greek word for a virgin maiden. And as far as the actual conception of Jesus goes, the biblical text in Luke merely states that the Holy Spirit fell upon Mary. Luke 1:31 says that the baby Jesus will be conceived inside her. Luke 1:35 says that the Holy Spirit will fall upon, and Matthew 1:23 just says that she will conceive as well. And let me add this as well. None of the phrases or terms used in the Greek text, none of them carry in their ancient context any type of sexual innuendo or sexual euphemism either. And just let me add this caveat. The Bible goes out its way to make sure that you know that Mary was a virgin before she conceived, when she got married, and that she stayed a virgin up until after Jesus was even born. And so when we look at the conception of Horus and we compare that to the conception of Jesus Christ, I don't know how people are saying that Jesus is a retelling of Horus. We look at Horus, his mother Isis, who was not a virgin. As a matter of fact, she was married to her brother husband before he was murdered. She puts his body back together. She brings his male organs back to life. She has sexual intercourse with his male organs, and that's how she conceives Horus. Versus when we look at Jesus, on the other hand, Jesus, whose human mother was a virgin who was not married yet, stayed a virgin even after she was conceived. His conception was a matter of no physical contact, no human contact, no sexual intercourse. It was merely a miraculous conception by the Holy Spirit. I don't know about y'all, but that don't sound the same to me. I mean, sure, if you want to look at it in the grand scheme of things, both of them were conceived in a miraculous way. But that's where the similarities stop, right? And it's the same thing when we compare Horus's birth and Jesus's birth. Just like his conception, when it comes to Horus's birthing accounts are spread across various artifacts in various locations in various spaces. And so you have to put this one together as well. But one of the main sources for Horus's birthing account is ancient Egyptian magical spell 90. Now this spell, sometimes part of it, and sometimes the whole thing, has been found on various ancient artifacts. It's on the Mertenec Stela, the Sokle Bahage, 3 Horusippi in Cairo, Leiden, and Baltimore, 2 statues in Paris and Beirut, and on Papyrus Hay 9961. And so based on the text from all of these artifacts, we know that the ancient Egyptian magical spell 90 says that Horus was born in the ancient city of Chemis when his mother Isis was on the run from the ancient Egyptian god Seth, who, by the way, was her husband's murderer and his brother, and who would later on become Horus's arch nemesis. And the only reason Isis goes to Chemis is because Thoth, the ancient Egyptian god of the moon, tells her that it would be a good idea for her to go and hide there. Anyway, she's in Chemis, and while she's in Chemis, Isis comes along this poor marsh girl, and the poor marsh girl takes her in, and as the poor marsh girl takes her in, Isis eventually gives birth in the marsh or the bush area. Now, I do want to put this out there. There's some debate amongst scholars as to whether this spell is talking about an Isis and a baby Horus or a young Horus, or is the spell talking about a pregnant Isis? But for the most part, most scholars generally agree that the spell is talking about a pregnant Isis. Now, that was the birthing account of Horus based upon the ancient Egyptian magical spell 90. There are, however, some coffin texts that talk about Horus's birth as well. There's coffin text spell 286. And it tells us Horus was born in Chemis and nursed in something called the Field of Fire. Spell 474 and 480 says Isis had to cut her own umbilical cord after Horus was born. And spell 989 says he was born within the god's Tamaris, which is basically some type of ancient Near Eastern shrub. So basically what we get from these texts, from the magical spell 90 and from these coffin texts, is that the ancient Egyptians believed that Horus was born in the ancient city of Chemis while his mother Isis was on the run from her psycho murderous brother-in-law Seth. Now, let's compare what we know about the birthing accounts of Horus to what we know about the birthing accounts of Jesus, which is primarily found in the Gospel account of Luke. And so according to the Gospel of Luke, Mary, Jesus' mom, and Joseph, Mary's husband but not Jesus' daddy, they have to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem because of some type of census that's taking place, right? And likely because everybody's doing all this traveling and coming into town into Bethlehem, Mary ends up giving birth to Jesus in the stable area of somebody's house because there was probably no more room for them in the guest area of the house, right? Then, according to Luke, it tells us that in another area of Bethlehem, these shepherds were shepherding, and these angels came to the shepherds and said, hey, Jesus, who's the promised Messiah, is born. And so the shepherds are like, hey, we probably should go check this out. This seems like a really big deal. The shepherds go, they find little baby Jesus where the angels told him. And then the story ends with the shepherds being so excited and geeked out that they found baby Jesus just like the angels said they would. That's the birth of Jesus according to the Gospel of Luke. So let's combine everything together, shall we? We'll start with Horus's conception. We have Horus, who was conceived when his mother had sexual intercourse with her deceased husband. We have Jesus, who was conceived through no human contact and no sexual intercourse by the miraculous power of the Holy Spirit. We have Horus, who was born in Chemis while his mother was on the run from her psycho murderer brother-in-law Seth. We have Jesus born in Bethlehem while his parents had to move because of a census that was going on, and he ended up being born in an area with animals because there was no room for him in the guest area of someone's home. You know, call me crazy, but I'm not seeing how Jesus is a retelling of Horus at this point. I'm really not. Sure, there was miraculous conception. Sure, there was movement at a birth. Sure, they both had mamas, but that's really where the similarities stop. So I just don't see how people can claim that Jesus's narrative is simply a retelling of the Horus narrative. And let me just say something else about this December 25th business while we're here. None, let me say it for the people in the back, none of the ancient texts or the ancient accounts for Horus or Jesus specify any type of date for their births. None of them say anything about a December 25th. As a matter of fact, the only source I found that mentions any type of anything close to a winter birth date for Horus is from Plutarch's account of the Isis and Osiris mythology. And according to Plutarch, it simply says that about the time of the winter solstice, she, Isis, gave birth to Harpocrates, and that's Horus's Greek name, imperfect and premature amid the early flowers and shoots. And then when we talk about the birth of Jesus, December 25th was something that was established years after his birth by Christian tradition. As a matter of fact, when you look at some of the early Christian fathers, they even go back and forth as to when Jesus was born exactly. For example, Clement of Alexandria, who was this 2nd century Christian teacher from Egypt, he talks about the birth of Jesus possibly taking place on May 20th or April 19th or 20th. But then we do have the writings of the Christian writer Hippolytus, who also was around the 2nd century, dating to around 170 to 235 CE, where he suggests that the birth of Jesus was possibly around the end of December. The moral of the story is that none of the ancient sources specify a date of December 25th, which ultimately voids any type of notion that Jesus' birth on December 25th is a retelling of Horus being born on the 25th, when none of the sources for either Horus or Jesus say that either one of them was born on December 25th. So based on the conception and the birth of Jesus and Horus, can y'all see how unalike these narratives are so far? Like, it's crazy to me that people want to put this argument forth, right? But let's see what happens next time when we talk about Horus's and Jesus's deaths and resurrections. Maybe there's more to that. So if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you share this video. Make sure you're supporting your girl. We got to get that algorithming. And until next time, this is just so you know.